So good day, everybody. Welcome to This Will Transform Your Life, the Wisdom Podcast, where we take wisdoms from this book here and we break them down because we read wisdoms and they all sound really cool, but we really don't get the serious and the deeper meaning of it. And that's why we do this. We discuss this. And today, for the very first time on this podcast, I have a very special guest. Not only is she a friend, but also she is a PhD, Dr. Rosa Thomas, and she's a psychologist.
Mhm.
And okay, sorry. And oh, yes, I want to get, and it's the mental health strategist. That is your business, that is your company. And you can find her on Facebook at the mental health strategist, on Instagram at the mental health strategist. Just wash my I just washed my mouth. I can't do a thing with it. Anyway, so Rose, we met some time ago, and we became friends at a little business conference here.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted you to come on because not only are you impressive with your psychology, but we've had a couple of great conversations. And I got to tell you, everybody who's on here, she's got the sweetest voice I have ever heard when it comes to singing, and I heard it live. Anyway, it was great. So today we're going to discuss a wisdom out of the book, and it is very simple, but difficult to understand for most people. And it is we mimic or we complete our parents. And with that, I'm going to say, Dr. Rosa, I would like to make a comment, open this conversation up, if you will.
Well, George, I think one way we can open up this conversation is to think about whether we're talking about an opposition. Either we mimic our parents or we complete them as though there's no connection between those two
Mhm.
strategies, or we mimic our parents and complete them in ways that make them whole. So there, lots of different ways to think about what that phrase means.
Well, a lot of things I found is that many things are generational within families, and it comes from however far back. And every now and again, it'll take a little turn here, a little turn there. But there's influence on the mother and the father. But you can have one set of parents, and the mother's Irish or whatever, and the husband is something else. So they bring their traditions and try to blend them together. And of course, the children grow up and they're in this environment where they learn from the parents, their habits, their likes, their dislikes, um, religion, everything else. And then those kids will grow up, male or female, and they'll marry somebody from a different tradition and they're slightly or greater. And then they start their family and they get a blend of two different cultures or two different belief systems. And they, again, move on. And that's how it becomes generational. So you get a piece of this and a piece of this in each generation. But the main core, I think, is still there. So it's like habits. Right? So,
It's funny that you mentioned that, George. I have a half sister whom I did not meet until I was in my 50s.
wow.
And meeting her was fascinating. She, she's from my dad's side. She looked a lot like my father. And although my father had passed by the time I met her, um, she had mannerisms, the way she would hold her head, the way she moved her body, the way she would express her anger or her intensity, and the way she effused about different projects that she loved. It was like watching my dad, and they had not been together since she was maybe 2 or 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this in a very literal way, she was mimicking my dad,
Yeah.
and yet she hadn't been around him. I gotta wonder, like,
Yeah.
where does that come from?
So that would suggest that there is some genetics there, maybe? I don't know if
I
or
don't know. I mean, you, I think, probably know a little bit more about this than I do, since you actively work with the body, with Qigong. But I think, the way our bodies are structured organizes the range of movements and gestures and
Mhm.
the ways we express ourselves. And it could be that she picked up on a very early memory of
Mm,
him that imprinted with her, and then she expressed herself in a way that was very much like my
yeah.
dad. And like you know from when our previous meeting that I've been in the arts. I
Mhm.
sang. I used to sing. I don't sing anymore.
That's too
I,
bad. Really.
I hope to get back to it, but I don't sing anymore. And I was an actress for a while. I trained as an actress, and one of the things that we did was to simply people watch. To learn how to embody people.
Mhm.
Um, and so I say that because I think we part of mimicking is embodying members of your family, your mother, your father, the way my half sister, in some manner, embodied certain aspects of my father. And then in acting, you learn about embodying other ways. You learn other ways to move your body,
Mhm.
right? And so that I don't know that that's completing anything, but the mimicry is certainly there when it comes to how we embody the people around us and how we understand them, how the way they express themselves.
I think it has to be one or the other. I don't think
What do you
you can have
mean?
you can't mimic incomplete at the same time.
I think you can mimic and complete at the same time.
Yeah, it doesn't
Uh,
make sense to me.
well,
Um,
so we were chatting a little bit earlier, and we
mhm,
were talking about people who come from families with an alcoholic member, a parent,
mhm,
and uh, completing might be making up for uh, the alcoholism. I'm not going to be an alcoholic. I'm going to complete who I think my parents should have been if they had not been drinking. So I'm
mhm,
not going to drink, and that's my pathway to completing the best version of my parent.
mhm,
Um, we also talked about as we were chatting, people who are saying, I'm going to be successful. I come from a family that didn't have enough,
mhm.
and so I'm going to prove myself, and I'm going to be a big success financially or however else wise. And so they're doing everything they need to do. They're getting good grades in school. They're doing athletics and sports. They wind up getting scholarships. They wind up getting into different programs and colleges that their parents might not have had access to. And so in that way, they're completing their parents. But at the same time, rather than being in opposition, they may not be as available to their own families the way their parents weren't available to them. So I took a little jog here, but what I mean is if mom and dad are working really hard to make sure that the child can do better than they did, mom and dad don't have a lot of time or attention or energy for that child. And that child gets the message, I need to succeed. I need to make up for what my parents could not give me, complete them in that way. And yet, in their own families, what they've learned, what they're mimicking, is to be unavailable in ways their kids may need them.
So then, in that case, you could say they completed the not being very successful from the parents,
Uh huh.
but by doing so, working harder and later and harder, longer, that creates another pattern that their children are going to mimic or complete.
That they're mimicking from their own parents and that their children could mimic as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. That intergenerational thing you mentioned.
Well, I always understood, I've done some reading on this, that the child 0 to 7, actually in the third trimester to 7 years old, really doesn't operate on a conscious mind, and they don't have the filter. So they can sit and have a tea party and really pretend that they're with a friend and drinking tea or make mud patties, and so on. So they play with all these invisible friends, and they're just so open. So without the filter of, let's say, a conscious mind, things can get dropped right into the subconscious. So a lot of it is by watching. And sometimes, and I've seen my own kids do this when they were very young, they sit there, they look at you like this. They're completely almost in a daze, and they're absorbing everything, like your sister, movements and this and that and everything. And that's how we learn how to survive within a family. We don't know anything. We don't know
Right.
right from wrong, up from down. And the parents are going to tell us what's right, whether it is or not, it's another thing, or what's wrong. So that's probably what happened. Your sister too is just absorbing just by watching, not even not even thinking about it. It's not a thinkable thing. It's just is. It just goes in.
Yeah, just
Makes
goes
total
in.
sense. Yeah, good.
Yeah. What
Well,
also goes in is how the child learns, how do I get my needs met,
uh-huh.
right?
Oh,
And in order to get my needs met, I need to be the quiet child.
yeah,
And my parents will give me lots of, they'll praise me because they don't have to work hard while they're busy doing other things. Or
right.
another child might learn, I have to be loud and noisy and do everything I can to get attention from my parents. And my parents don't seem to like that,
Mhm.
but they pay attention to me, and that becomes a cycle, right?
Yeah. What's interesting, it's when an idea came or thought came to me when you were saying that.
Uh-huh.
It's from my mentor from way back, and he says, "You're all manipulators. Every one of you is a manipulator. You were raised in manipulation. If you don't eat your peas, you don't get your ice cream. If you don't go to bed now, you can't stay at your friend's tomorrow night. If you're going to do this, I'm taking your iPad away, your iPhone. And all these things are really manipulative. It's like, here's the carrot. You want this? You got to do this. And I thought about that. It hasn't popped into my head for a while. But that's, I think, what we do unconsciously. So there's another thing we
And
did.
it's a pattern that our parents probably learned in order to meet
Well,
their
they got,
parents' needs,
yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
they
So,
teach us, and we say, "Oh, this is how we have to be to get our parents' attention and love and to feel safe
yeah,
with our parents."
that's what we learned. And again, it's there's kids also, the pattern that parents go on. If a child is not loved or is beaten, if they do something bad, they get beaten, that sort of thing. They grow up thinking that's what love is, don't you think?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So that's why they abuse. They think it's love. And they're just mixed up inside based on what they learned from the parents. So that's something. And if people aren't aware of that, then the mimic or complete, if they become aware of that, they can sit back and look, well, why am I just like my mother or my father? And what are their habits? What do they do that I do? And you really think it through. And generally, it can start with what is it I don't like about my own behavior? Because I'm sure everybody understands that the behavior is not perfect. It's up
Mhm.
and down and around.
Yeah.
And that's a way to actually correct it.
Mm.
So if you understand, mimic, or complete, if you don't do that behavior, we talked about this earlier, this is fascinating. If you don't do that behavior, you complete that part. But as you said, all the other emotional stuff's still there. So we can still mimic the emotional stuff, but not do the drinking or the abusing or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So that opens up to, it's like a big book with a whole lot of pages, and each page is a behavior, or each page is a belief system, or each page is a different pattern.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I can fix this and fix this, but I'm going to leave this, or I can't fix this, whatever the case may be. So this opens up a whole new book, whole new bottle of wax, so to speak. Because I hadn't thought of it before we decided to do this, and I had the quote. It's in the book, and I think it was you that told me. You mentioned that to a mutual friend, and I got it from the mutual friend. He
Mm.
brought it up. And I said, we had to mimic our complete our parents. I said, I wrote that down. This is what it is. Then I find out he got that from you. Is that correct?
Well, that's the thing, George. We have a lot of blind spots, and I think that's how we can correct something that's really obvious, and then fall into the pattern of something that's not. And I don't know. Apparently, what I get, in my blind spots, people are saying, "You said this, you did that," and I have no clue. I have no idea that that's what I did.
Well, neither do I, because it's just either we say it unconsciously, and oh, someone said something the other day. It came right out. It's not what he meant, but the way he said it was unconsciously. And then I turned around and said, You just said that. No, I didn't. Then you did. No, I said this. No, you didn't. Anyway, so what do you think might be, and again, we haven't talked about this before, but how would somebody correct that? Is there something that and you might have to think about it and analyze it some more? But how can somebody correct these things? Because I've got some patterns I'd like to correct.
Well, that's a really big question, George. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
it-
Right.
Uh, there are different ways of going about it, right? Some people, okay, I'll start with myself. I had a psychology class in high school and went, whoa, okay, so people are different, and they're different in very different ways. And how does that happen? So that started me on the self-help kind of thing. Well, I'm going to read this book and find out what people do and how, if they don't want to do that, how do they change that?
Yeah.
Um, so, you can do self-help.
Mhm.
At some point, many people think about going to therapy. In fact, I was for one of my products, I was looking up, there are 78 million people who consider going into therapy but never do. So
Yeah.
therapy is one of those options out there that people consider, and there's a lot to say about therapy and why people do or don't go into it. But it's one way that people say, I I'm not comfortable with me, or I don't like me, or I want to change this about me, or want to become this. And they use therapy to do that. Other people use coaching,
Mhm.
right? They'll go to somebody who can elicit those strengths that they may not, the blind spots, they can't see. Oh, I'm actually pretty good about that. This inner critic in my head that's telling me, oh, it's not right. It's not accurate. It's trying to do something for me, but it's not. So they'll go to a coach and they'll figure out the way they talk to themselves. They'll figure out where their strengths are. They'll figure out how to elicit those strengths and apply them to what they hopefully apply them to what
Mhm.
they want to achieve or accomplish for themselves. And then I call myself a strategist. I think uh, when I think about going to a strategist like me, and I don't know if there are other strategists out there or people who think of themselves that way, um, but I think about folks in business. What a corporation might hire a consultant as a strategic planner, right? Somebody to look at their organization and say, "Oh, this is where you want to go. This is how you want to become. Well, here are your assets. Here are your deficits or areas where your challenges that you need to improve. These are the dynamics in your company, and let's plot a course through all that, recognizing what you have, what you'd like to have, what gets in the way, and move you toward that goal." So it's sort of in that strategy would be in that space between having insights that you might get
Mhm.
from a therapist and having actions that you're supposed to take from a coach, but not really knowing, "Oh, how does this action apply to my insight?" And then there's a strategist that pulls those things together.
Right.
So self-help, coaching, therapy, strategy are different ways of doing that in broad strokes. In simpler strokes, I would say there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, and it's such an overused term. A lot of people don't know. Most people, I think, these days really don't know what that means. But it
Agreed.
is taking the time to be reflective, the journaling or the noticing, be getting curious about why is that person looking at me that way? Am I, instead of automatically going, oh, they don't like me, or they love me, or whatever judgment or interpretation we come up with out of habits, out of mimicking the way we understand people from our parents,
Mhm.
we can start getting curious and say, well, why is that? Or why am I so angry about XYZ? I think you could speak to this, George. A lot of us, as we mature, and we're in the same camp here, um, we realize at 20 something, I was furious about how my girlfriend or boyfriend or partner or whoever treated me. And now when I see that same behavior, it's like, oh, people are different.
Mhm.
the I don't need to expend that energy. I'm not threatened anymore. And why was I ever threatened? Right. So we get curious about ourselves as well as how other people and how they respond to us. That's a lot to throw out.
Yeah, that's okay. But
Question.
well, it's interesting. So let me ask you a couple questions. So where would you start? Because I've never been to therapy. All my therapy has been self therapy. That's why I do Qigong for the last 30 years and karate
Oh,
45 years.
you know,
So,
I am pulling back from being a practicing psychotherapist, so maybe I can be a little more candid than I would have been otherwise.
yeah.
Um, I grew up of very limited means.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I won't go into my sad story of how I grew up.
Let
Um,
let me get
but
my Kleenex.
and I don't mean to be unfair to myself with the gesture and all, but um, I realized I was having trouble relating to people. I was a people pleaser. I was very shy. I couldn't look people in the eye. Uh, and I didn't know why I felt, being an actress let me open up. It was a script. I could inhabit somebody else. But interpersonally, in the real world, talking with people, I didn't understand what was going on with the way I related to people or how they related to me. Um, I could not afford to go into therapy. I had been reading self-help books since high school, just trying to piece together what was going on in my life. Um, but I found a way to there was a teaching hospital,
Mhm,
teaching clinic, and they interviewed people as possible therapy candidates. And I did that and got into therapy that way and learned a lot about um, the inner workings of my mind and where that came from. The person I worked with was a Freudian, and I could get lost in that territory very quick. Um, but I learned a lot about the inner workings of my mind, and that set me to reading Freud and Jung and William James and all these other. So I started taking in all this information, and I did feel better, but I felt incomplete, if you will, like I wasn't learning enough about myself or about whether I was mimicking or completing my parents, or in what ways, or what was pernicious and what was not, what was healthful. So I decided to go back to school. I left college in like my first year to be an actress and a singer, which is one way of learning about yourself. But I thought I'd learn formally and decided to go back to school and study psychology. And it was just fascinating. So I became a, a psychologist, went on to graduate school. Um, People are fascinating. I'm fascinating, even though I don't think so. But for me, I'm really curious about me. And
mhm,
other people are, it's just, they're, why do they do what they do? Why do they think this or act this way or have this opinion or this attitude? And how does it serve them? And can they be served in better ways? So those questions were there for me. And then I just took that out into the world, becoming a practitioner. I'm also an administrator and do other things, but a practitioner of the psychological arts, if you will.
okay, how's that work?
How does which work?
This is the practitioner of the martial I was gonna say
The
martial arts,
psychological
the
arts?
psychological arts.
Well, circumstances, uh, forced is a strong word, but I'll use it anyhow. Circumstances forced me to work in the prisons.
Mhm,
Um, After I came out of my postgraduate studies, I had moved here to California. Um, I didn't understand the different categories of practitioners out here. There were a lot of people practicing at the master's with a master's credential I'd never heard of, and the market was pretty saturated. So I wound up working for a state agency, working for the prisons, and that was wow. I think I'm getting digressing a little bit, but I'll go ahead and down this rabbit hole. Uh, I saw people behaving in ways that were in the training films I had in graduate school, and those folks were not in prisons, they were in psychiatric hospitals. I saw a tremendous amount of trauma, not only the traumas from inflicting trauma on other people, but embodied trauma from the way many of the people I worked with grew up. And so it pulled me deeper and deeper into, well, what is trauma? Um, how do people get stuck in these patterns and mimic the patterns that they came out of? What problems are they solving when they become violent or criminal in other ways? So I think I got a little bit lost from your question, George, but that's what pulled me in more. So, oh yes, in practice, um, I saw a need,
mhm,
and I saw that I hadn't been, although I went to one of the best, we like to say the best, but I'll say one of the best PhD programs in the country. we didn't learn how to deal with the phenomena, the people, the way they were presenting. We didn't learn how to treat that level of distress. I learned, I self-taught largely, got consultation, took extra training, and then I didn't want that to be my whole world, right? So I also opened up a part-time private practice to work with people in the community, people who were suffering from traumas, assaults, and various things, and people who had depression, people who had major mental illnesses like a bipolar disorder, and people who had problems of living and just wanting to cope. I don't think you want the soup to nuts of how I
No,
saw people.
no,
I could go there, but I can get into the weeds really quickly, George.
well, okay, so let me ask you this. The difference between what you do now and traditional psychotherapy.
Okay. You know, uh, I'm not going to present any evidence on this other than my own anecdotal observational experiences. And I
All that's
think,
needed.
huh?
That's all that's needed.
Okay. So I think my field has become quite splintered. Uh, there are a lot of different protocols to treat specific problems. There are over 80,000 practitioners of various kinds in the country. Let's give you a minute, roll that number back. There are many thousands of us across a wide range of credentials. There are over 80 ways, approaches, modalities, protocols, practices that people use. Um, and I think a lot of my colleagues, my early career colleagues more particularly, can get slotted into practicing in one way. And so what happens is a person will find a therapist and the therapist has a hammer and you need to be a nail or it's not going to work. What I've learned largely from working in the prisons was I needed to be holistic in my approach. It's not only about the thoughts or voices that are not psychotic voices, but the things we tell ourselves in our head. It's not just the cognitive stuff that's happening. There's also emotion, which often gets conflated, blended in with what a thought and emotion, they're the same thing. And in some sense they are, but that's really esoteric. I'm not going to go there. And then there's the body um, that embodies all of that. And of course, there's the spirit, right, that animates who we are and what we accept as for our values and what's real. So I think the way I practice that's different than many of my colleagues is that um, when I look at the whole person, I'm looking at least those four dimensions and I see the mind as a unifying construct, a unifying entity, experience that brings those things together and how we see ourselves, how we experience ourselves, and how we take in people around us. So when I attune to someone, I'm looking for those dimensions, and I'm looking for as a therapist, I'm looking for those dimensions, and I'm looking for the root that this person is seeking as a way of escaping into another version of themselves that's healthier, more comfortable, more functional in one way or another.
Boy, could we go down that rabbit hole.
We could go down
That,
that
I mean,
rabbit hole. I
that's
started to
for
head down that
hours.
way.
Now, just to let you know, I got all my psychiatry and psychology training from two people, Niles and Fraser Crane.
I'm so sorry, doctor, 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 doctor.
Anyway, but
They're hilarious. They're
they are.
hilarious.
Yeah. But anyway, okay, to talk about Qigong for a moment, it is a holistic practice. It's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Mhm.
So my mentor, and it's in this book, his quote of success is physical well-being, mental growth, emotional balance through a spiritual understanding. And if you have all four together, then you're well-rounded. So what does Qigong do? It's the physical, it's the mental thought process, it's the emotional balancing it all out, and it's also very spiritual. So now Qigong and Tai Chi have been used in prisons with great success for reducing stress and calming people down and finding going more inside. For kids, there's 6 studies that I have that was done on children doing Tai Chi and Qigong.
Mhm.
Absolutely fascinating. This is down in the Boston area. One, when they did it, bullies stopped bullying.
Yeah.
Kids who were bullied stopped getting bullied. Kids who were highly reactive, according to the parents, just were a completely different level. They calmed right down. And that was a number of studies. As a matter of fact, that's what I worked with one of my students, who's doctorate, PhD, physical therapy, and she put this course with me with the Qigong that we do with kids. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then same with anybody who suffers stress. I mean, you have to go inside.
You
So
have to go inside. Yeah.
breathing is important. I mean, I can quote the science on the health because one of my other students is a doctor of physical therapy. And what he does, he brings to the table, we work together, all the research on the physical things, on aging, on anything. Now, it extends your life. And here's this research, several studies that prove that. So the physical is just the physical. That's just getting you, it's like, that's kind of like white belt in a karate martial arts kind of way.
I'm a judoka.
Well, well, good. So when you get a black belt, basically you're a white belt all over again. All the black belt means is you're teachable.
Mhm.
Then you go into second degree, third degree, and all the way up. I made it to seventh, and
And
then
then the red belt in my area.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't need the eighth. One more. It's because you get to a point where, listen, you know what you know. It's not you're going to learn so much more. It's all
That's right, George.
you learn.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the physical would be like you get the black belt. Now the work begins. Okay, so it's calming, going inside, and it's feeling. People think too much when they do qigong. So instead of to
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
feel, because they got these thoughts keep coming in. That's just their autopilot, if you will. But then when you get that and start feeling, and then you start understanding the chi, then you find you calm down and I'm not reactive anymore, or much less reactive. Oh man, I slept last night great, and all these things, and then you have an understanding somewhat of other people, if as you do it long enough, where you have compassion, you have more compassion, you have more gratitude, and that sort of thing, because you don't see people the same way. We tend to
Y-
project on people, I think, and judge. We judge ourselves, we judge circumstances, we judge other people. And I
Yes.
caught myself doing when I learned that. I walked down the street and I said, "Geez, why are you so big?" And where's this coming from? I'm a nice, loving person, and it's probably one of those trigger things that I got. Anyway,
Yeah.
so everybody needs a way to react and to learn and to grow and so on. And
Yeah, George. So you're reminding me, you had the question earlier about how do people figure this out? What do they do? Do they go to, and I've talked about therapy, blah, blah. But what I hear you talking about is, sort of that middle ground that I think many of us in our allied fields use is we can go top down or outside in or inside out,
yeah,
right? Top down or bottom up. And so what I hear about the beautiful blend of Qigong is that you're doing kind of top down in that you're teaching the forms and the motions and inside out because you're informing what's going on inside about how to be at rest, how to be at peace.
yeah.
So it's a really beautiful blend and interaction that brings about ventral vagal states.
Well, you see, like a coach, I teach qigong, but I teach movements, but I point the way. Said, just do this. And they say, oh, I can't get that one right. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
You
Yeah.
can't do these wrong, but you can do them better. Just
Yeah.
with practice and patience. And somebody said today, somebody in class this morning, a lady, she was putting stuff away for the fall and hurt her shoulder. So she came in and we did some energy work. And she told me, I said, well, let's just see what happens. So we did some energy work on her shoulder, and I got a text from her an hour later. She says, my shoulder's still really warm, and it feels so much better. The pain's gone. That's so.
Love it.
Then,
So I mentioned mindfulness is one of these global terms, and as I hear you talk about qigong, I'm reminded of bringing that mindfulness down to a level that's accessible to people.
yeah,
It's an access route toward inner peace and stability. I've been restudying. I studied hypnosis and went through my beginner and intermediate stages, but didn't finish the last one. back in a certification course and just about done with it. And I think this this idea of going inside, I often say this to the people I'm working with, close your eyes and go inside. So we're not doing exactly what you do, but we're going inside and then working, teaching the body what it already knows
Mhm.
about stress management and using that knowledge to solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
And so I worked with this one person who had a history of trauma. I wasn't working on the trauma because I wasn't being her therapist, her psychotherapist. I was being a hypnotherapist with her, and we worked through a present issue because
Mhm.
more about changing a habit of the mind, and we anchored that. Um, and then she contacted me later that day and saying, "Oh my gosh, that anchor, every time I do that, I feel the peace inside." And then a few days later, like almost a week later, she sends this email to me and she says, "I was going to tell you like the next day, but I thought I'd wait just in case, it wasn't really real. But this clenching I've had in one part of my body released, and it stayed released."
Mhm.
You know, so
Huge, huge.
you- yeah. And so that going inside and teaching resources through the forms of qigong or teaching resources by eliciting what's already inside for some people for some issues is I it's just beautiful to see how that changes lives when people follow the access route that they need at the time. Not everybody needs the same thing at the same time. The hammer and nail issue, I don't want to get trapped there, like I
Mhm.
say some of my colleagues do. But the going inside, and whatever meaningful route you have to get there is a huge step
Mhm.
in making personal change, not and getting away from the mimicking and the completing. Because I mean, after all, George, where does that come from? Even if we're trying to do something different, what's our point of reference for doing something different?
Right.
It's what we already know. It's what we picked up in the 0 to 7 years you're talking about.
Yeah. Well,
So, yeah.
we
So
didn't know
where's the
any better.
glimmer of what mom or dad or both did that gives us access to another way of being in the world, of,
Mhm.
being who we need to be in the world?
Well, I think people are waking up now to me. I'm not who I think I am. And I had somebody ask me same question 20 times. They said, "Who are you?
Mm.
Who are you?" Just kept going until I finally get down to who you are. So you're not this, you're not your belief systems, you're not your all these different things. They're just symptoms, I think. So how would somebody just go about, let's talk about how they could understand more what they, because everything has a solution. We don't just always know the question. So if you put a piece of paper down, if you put a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle, one across at the top, on one side you put mother, one side you put father, or vice
On one
versa.
side you put what? And
Mother, and the
oh,
other side you put father, or
uh-huh.
vice versa. And that line down the middle. So all of a sudden I start, okay, why or what am I like my mother? What do I do? What habits do I have? What sayings do I keep saying? What foods do I keep cooking? Or whatever. Just think, what am I like my father? And you write these things down. These are just like, they're not so much patterns, but they're beliefs. Patterns are all made up of those beliefs. You do the same thing with the father. So now you can go down that list. I'm just making this up on the
I
spot
hear you,
now.
George. I hear you.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can't fix a problem if you don't know you have a problem. And I got to give you a little story about that, a little segue to prove that. Yeah, this is a true story about Houdini. Now, Houdini said no prison could hold him. So he was challenged in England. The very old prison had 4 foot thick walls and steel doors and so on. And he said, okay, so now he's just in his underwear. And then they leave him there. And he said, okay, let us know when you come out. So he took a piece of wire out of his underwear, wrapped it around his toe, stuck his toe through the bar because the lock was on the outside, down the side. And he worked it and he worked it and he worked it because he knew how to do this, and it didn't work. And he kept trying and trying, and finally, out of exhaustion, he just fell against the door and it opened. The point is, it was never locked. He was in a prison that he didn't know he was in, so he
That's
couldn't
right.
escape.
Yeah.
So that's the point. So, if you want to find out more about yourself, you can take, I'm just thinking, you take what do I mimic and what have I completed?
Well, so
What,
what about this approach, George? Let me add on to this, just another dimension to what you're saying. If you have that list of one parent and the other, um, instead of saying, how am I like this parent or this parent, doing that who am I exercise for each one of
yeah,
them. Who was mom? Who mom was out this, mom was this, mom was this 20 times until you get down to the core belief about who that parent was, the
uh-huh,
core experience of that parent, and then doing the same thing for the other parent. And then in the course of that, you might see, oh,
yeah,
this is how I am a blend of these people or have
mm,
allied more with one or the other. This is how I'm mimicking in this way. This is how I'm completing or making up what's missing in another.
uh-huh,
And that might be another way of adding to your exercise for people to access instead of if I were to say how am I like my mother or my father, that's as a psychologist who's
yeah,
been in therapy and done my own work. That's a question I ask very often, and I do, I can get stuck in my stories.
yeah,
So I think your route, this edition is one way to say, how can I get out of my story
yeah.
about who I am relative to my mother or my father and get
Well, I
out of the
just made this up
story
now.
about our parents. Huh?
I said I just made this up now. I
Yeah.
haven't given any thought, but I like it. I think like the way you think, and because I think there's, yeah, I'm gonna make some notes here and work on that. Who knows,
Who
Ro-
knows? Who knows?
Rosa? Maybe we'll come up with something that we'll put together, and we can help people discover who they truly are.
Yeah, yeah. I'm much more in my psychologist camp as we're talking today, George, than my strategist camp. Because when it comes to strategies, the mimicking and the completing are based on the maps we make,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We see life as this particular territory, and um, we take from mom, we take from dad, we take from peers, siblings, and this is the map that gets to our understanding of the territory that we're in.
yeah,
And then we look around that territory and we say, I'm not sure this is where I want to be.
yeah,
So in terms of doing strategy, it's like, well, um, let's get a different map.
yeah.
What tools are available for either getting a different map or finding a different route through the map that you already have. It's probably the simpler way.
I, I I think a lot of people would think, why am I the way I am? 'Cause I know that's a question I ask myself from time to time.
Uh-huh.
And so, why do I get angry at this? Why do certain people just piss me off? Like, simply put,
Right. Well,
'cause,
ooh, you
we all
automatically
have
dislike
those.
somebody. Yeah.
Some of us
Ooh.
have some of us have more of those kind of people in our lives than others, but nonetheless, they're there because there's triggers that go on. But anyway, I think that this is big. I always was fascinated with this quote when I first heard it. And I wrote it down and I said, yeah, this is going to go in the book because there's more to this than just those words. There's a whole psychology, there's a whole healing aspect, there's a whole changing aspect that's possible when people understand. It's like Houdini. If you don't know you're in prison, you can't escape. So
Yeah.
this is kind of because I think our parents kind of make, not intentionally, but make prisons for us just by their actions, the way
Well,
they
they put
the
up
way
the
they live.
walls. Yeah.
Yeah,
They show us where the limits are of who and how we're supposed to be.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, maybe we close on this quote from Val Bundwell. The guy was just familiar, and he said a couple of things. He says, "In this earth
Mm.
is a place where you have experiences, and the only experiences you get is the one you need. That's it. So if you don't have that experience, because we all have similar but different experiences, why? It's a lesson. School is just earth is school. Every experience is a lesson. The only one we get is the one we need. I think I love that one. I've used it often. But anyway, and I think this is, it's like you can say, why is everybody watching this today? What, geez, I never thought I'd watch this. they sit down, it's fascinating, and some say, "I don't need that because I'm perfect," or whatever. Anyway, yeah, I could go on for another hour, Rose. Maybe we'll
Well,
have to
it's a pleasure, George. It feels like just a warm up. So thank you
well,
so
and it
much.
does, it
Yeah.
does, because we're just so comfortable. I enjoy talking to you, and we can talk about things. I just know we can.
Yeah,
Different
totally.
backgrounds, different experiences, but a common desire for truth and healing and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So I want to thank
Common
you.
desire for peace, peace in the soul, at
Exactly.
least for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks. We're having a love fest here. Well, Rose, thanks. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, let me explain something. You may have heard me mention Rose. That's like the name for
For friends.
buds. We're friends, and we're all friends now, even the ones that are watching. But it's Rosa, Dr. Rosa Thomas. Not only a great uh, therapist, but an amazing singer. They have no idea. Anyway,
I
that's
will get back to it, George.
yeah, I know. All right, Rose. Listen, this has been a real great pleasure. You're my first guest, and this is showing. It's not showing tonight, but it'll be showing at the next podcast, and that's next Wednesday, November 5th, I believe. So it'll come on at the same time. It's also going on YouTube, so people will be able to watch it. Right now, it's still private, but we're going to open it up, and all the episodes. This is episode 7, and all the episodes will be there. So go back and watch it, and tell their friends, and say, "Wow, that Dr. Rose is something else, man."
Oh, thank you, George.
Yeah, I'm sure not the only one who thinks that. Anyway, thank you again so much. You've been a real pleasure having on. I'm hoping we get to do this again sometime.
Me too, George. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
My pleasure. All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Rosa and myself in this conversation. It went in places we never intended it to go, and that's the way I like it. We just start and let the energy take it to where it is. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Thank you so much. Have I told you all how much I love you today? And always remember peace, love, gratitude, joy. Forgive, forget, and let go. And really important, and this is science, tell somebody you love them. It'll change many things in the instant. Okay, thanks, Dr. Rosa. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.